All right, let's just jump right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer. So today we're looking at one of humanity's oldest and, honestly, most misunderstood practices. When you hear the word asceticism, you probably immediately picture, I don't know, bizarre religious isolation, right? Somebody wearing super itchy clothes, living alone in a cave, and starving themselves for some mysterious, untouchable reason. But what if we've been reading this completely wrong? What if we actually look at the historical records and discover that asceticism isn't just weird religious stuff, but it's actually a universal human response to overwhelming pressure? So today, we're decoding asceticism, not as a bunch of strange religious doctrines, but as a highly practical, observable behavioral grammar.
To really grasp how this works, we're actually not going to start with a prophet or a monk. We're going to start with a young Scottish guy named Angus Barbieri. Back in 1965, Angus did something that's almost impossible to even imagine. I mean, what actually happens when you stop eating for 382 days? Angus entered a hospital in Dundee at 27 years old, and he weighed 456 pounds. He desperately wanted to escape a body that had just become painfully difficult to live in. So under strict medical supervision, drinking absolutely nothing but water, tea, coffee, and taking his vitamins, he simply stopped eating solid food for over a year.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer extremity of his medically supervised fast. To really understand the impact here, just listen to his own words. "I have forgotten what food tasted like." I mean, wow. Angus dropped from 456 down to 180 pounds. He lived inside a level of constraint that most of us literally cannot even fathom. He woke up every single day for 382 days and made the exact same choice, to just ignore the noise of hunger, the smell of food, the everyday habits of normal life. But you know, the most profound part of Angus's story isn't actually the deprivation itself. It's the beautiful, grounded simplicity of how it all ended. When he finally broke his fast after more than a year, there was no grand philosophical speech. He just ate a boiled egg, a piece of bread, and some butter. And he simply said, "I thoroughly enjoyed my egg and I feel very full." It's incredible. Intense withdrawal and physical constraint stripped away everything complicated and just left this profound, simple clarity. And actually, this physical mechanism of stripping away the noise to find clarity, that is the exact engine driving the historical figures we're about to look at.
Here's our agenda for today. We'll start with the universal pattern, move into pressure and withdrawal, examine the internal shift, follow the return to society, and then finally, look at preserving the legacy.
Section 1. The Universal Pattern. Behavior over belief.
So, the source material for our explainer today proposes a really fascinating thesis. The author, Ryan McLean, suggests that figures like Moses, Siddhartha Gautama, Jesus, and Muhammad are actually all performing the exact same structural function, regardless of their different doctrines. We're calling this a behavioral grammar. We're not asking if their theological beliefs are identical. We know they're not. We're asking, do they follow the exact same observable sequence of human transformation?
And this brilliantly illustrates our method here. Function over vocabulary. One story says a mountain, another says a desert, another a forest, maybe another a cave. We don't just immediately throw our hands up and declare them completely different. Instead, we ask, well, what is the person actually doing there? While the geographical costumes change, they all serve the exact same function. They're basically acting as a giant do not disturb sign for the brain, separating the individual from all that ordinary, everyday social noise.
Section 2. Pressure and withdrawal. When life stops working.
Look, no one starts the sequence by just casually waking up and deciding to become an ascetic. Everybody starts with what we call a received identity. Basically, a life situation you didn't choose. You're born into a body, a family, and a society you didn't pick, kind of like Moses in Pharaoh's household or Siddhartha in a royal palace. But then, pressure built. Moses sees oppression. Siddhartha recognizes suffering. Ordinary life just stops resolving those burdens. Staying the same simply stops working. And it's exactly that pressure that forces the withdrawal, escaping the noise to find a space where something entirely new can happen.
Section 3. The internal shift. Inside the isolated zone. Let's move to the mechanics and see how this builds across 3 distinct steps. First up is constraint. This is reducing input like food, speech, or possessions. Next is compression. This is where the scattered, chaotic wants of the mind start to narrow down. It's honestly a lot like turning on your phone's airplane mode just so you can finally stop getting notifications. And finally, we hit calibration. This is where your internal orientation actually stabilizes. You finally hear what actually matters. Just look at the history here. Moses fasts for 40 days on Sinai. Jesus fasts in the wilderness. Muhammad retreats to a cave. The Greek philosopher Diogenes literally lives in a storage jar. No way, right? But this neutrally proves that fasting, silence, or renunciation aren't actually about punishing the body. Not at all. They are the primary physical mechanisms to reduce internal competition and noise. You take away the distractions so the mind can finally compress and focus.
Which perfectly leads us to calibration. At this point, the scattered self is no longer calling the shots. The person aligns with a much greater ordering principle. Now, different traditions definitely use different words for this. Paul says, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me." Taoists call it the Zhenren, or the true person. Buddhists call it awakening. Islam calls it submission. So while the theology obviously differs, functionally, the internal compass has stopped spinning and has finally locked onto true north.
Section 4. The return to society. Re-entering the field.
Now, the entire point of withdrawal is that it actually prepares for the return. You don't just stay in the cave forever. The transformed person re-enters the social field. Moses descends the mountain. Jesus comes out of the wilderness and begins preaching. The Buddha walks to Deer Park to teach. Muhammad returns from the cave to proclaim. The private transformation absolutely must collide with the public world.
But as you might guess, the social world is rarely ready for this. We get what the sources call a recognition split. The return person reveals what already governs the attention of the crowd. And the reactions? Well, some people listen and totally receive the message. Some people outright reject it. And some people, like we see in the famous story of Moses, immediately build a substitute attractor, like a shiny golden calf. Because, let's face it, humans are incredibly talented at entirely missing the point and just clinging to comfortable distractions.
Yet, despite all the rejections, something else happens. We enter this attention attractor stage. Because a person's coherent actions persist under pressure, a community just naturally gathers around them. It happens every time. Moses gathers Israel around the covenant, Jesus gathers disciples, Buddha forms the Sangha, Muhammad builds a community, Mahabharata gathers Jain followers, even Anthony the Great literally runs into the desert to be completely alone, and people still track him down because his stable coherence becomes just completely magnetic.
Section 5. Preserving the legacy. How grammar survives.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this. Without preservation, the grammar just dies. Think about things like rituals, like the Day of Atonement, or calendars dictating Ramadan or Lent, or texts like the sayings of the Desert Fathers, monastic rules. These aren't just arbitrary, pointless rules meant to make life boring. No, they're highly engineered mechanisms designed to preserve that original transformative sequence. They exist to allow future generations to step into the exact same pattern of constraint and clarity, even thousands of years later.
And that really ties this entire explainer together perfectly. As the author Ryan McLean writes, clarity is not usually found by adding more noise. It is found by removing what prevents recognition. Whether it's Angus Barbieri fasting for over a year, or prophets scaling massive mountains, or monks embracing total silence, the universal human realization is that turning down the noise is quite literally the only way to find your true orientation.
Which leaves us with a really important question for you to take away today. Look, you don't need to run off to a desert or fast for 40 days. But in our modern world of endless digital inputs, notifications, and just constant distractions, when life gets way too loud, what noise do you need to remove? Think about how you can actually apply this ancient behavioral grammar to your own life today. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.